Today, I'm going to show you something that 95% of players in Clash of Clans don't understand. Not because it's difficult, but because you can't see it. And that's exactly why it's dangerous. This one invisible concept is the reason why one player triples effortlessly, while another uses the exact same army and fails. And sometimes you even triple, but you don't actually understand why it worked. And if you don't know why you succeeded, you can't repeat it. That's the trap. You can play this game for 10 years, win wars, hit Legends League, even consider yourself a good player, and still be missing the foundation the entire game is built on. And once you see this, you won't be able to watch another attack the same way ever again. This isn't about the meta. It's not about overpowered troops. It's not about the best army for Town Hall X. This is the structural mechanic that defines how every single base works. And if Clash still exists 20 years from now, this concept will still be true. So before we talk about armies, you need to understand this first. When I say an entry was insane, or that a funnel was perfect, or even that a triple was basically guaranteed, I'm not talking about the troops. I'm talking about defense pathing, the order in which defenses activate, lock on, and apply damage. And most players never consciously control it. Picture a base layered left and right, now enters straight through the middle. Both sides activate. The back end wakes up. Expos fire instantly. Within seconds, every defensive layer is locked onto your army. You didn't start a controlled fight. You triggered the entire base. And here's the deception. Sometimes you still triple. So you assume it worked, but it didn't. You just had enough power to survive a flawed entry. At lower town halls, that mistake is invisible. Raw strength hides bad sequencing. The base isn't strong enough to punish you. So you climb confidently until you don't. Because once you face stronger, well-built bases, the exact same entry collapses. Now damage is layered properly. Now simultaneous activation gets punished. Heroes fall earlier. Core pushes melt faster. Time runs out. Same army, same idea, different result. And that's when players feel stuck. They blame the meta. They change armies. They search for something new. But nothing changed. Defense pathing did. At lower levels, the game forgives mistakes. At higher levels, it exposes them. And once it exposes them, you either understand this mechanic or you plateau. So here's where everything changes. Let's flip the perspective. Instead of entering straight through the middle, you enter from a controlled side angle. Now watch what happens. Only the front layer activates first. The deeper defenses don't engage immediately. And while they're still waking up, you've already removed the first source of damage. You're no longer fighting the entire base at once. You're dismantling it layer by layer. That's the shift. And that shift changes everything. Same army, same hero levels, same spells, same timing. Two completely different outcomes. Middle entry, full activation, stacked damage. Heroes disappear early. The push collapses. Controlled entry, front layer falls first. Back end activates late. Damage is staggered. Momentum builds. Clean triple. So what changed? Not the army, the engagement order. You controlled defense pathing. That's what a directed entry really means. It's not just good funneling. It's forcing the base to respond in stages. You're deciding when damage happens. You're deciding how much damage happens at once. That's structure. That's high-level control. Most players deploy troops and react. Strong players manipulate activation. Elite players control the attack before it even starts. Let's move into the practical part. This is where the concept starts to apply to real attacks. In this example, the player begins with a very strong Royal Champion entry. It's a variation of a champion walk, and this type of opening is extremely powerful. In many cases, it can remove an entire sector of the base by itself. And that's exactly what happens here. The champion clears a large portion of the side, several defenses go down, and most importantly, it creates a very clean funnel. At this point, the setup is excellent. The entry did exactly what it was supposed to do. But this is where most players make a critical mistake. Instead of thinking about defense activation, they only think about value. They look at the base and ask, where can I get the most buildings? Or, which defense is the most dangerous? So they choose the entry that gives them the most immediate value. And in this attack, the player decides to go straight toward the town hall. At first glance, this looks perfect. You're heading directly for the most important building on the base. But strategically, this creates a massive problem. Because the moment the army enters that line, the entire base activates. Now remember the simplified example we looked at earlier. When the army entered through the middle, every defensive layer activated at the same time. And that's exactly what's happening here. The town hall engages. Core defenses wake up. Back-end defenses start firing. Instead of fighting one layer at a time, the army suddenly fights the entire base at once. And that stacks a massive amount of damage. The army gets overwhelmed. The push loses momentum and the attack collapses, which is incredibly frustrating because the initial entry was actually very good. The champion walk created a perfect setup. Under normal circumstances, this type of opening should easily lead to a triple, but the second entry ignored defense pathing, and that single decision collapsed the entire attack. This mistake is extremely common. Most players don't even realize they're making it. At lower town halls, the game rarely punishes this. Your army is strong enough to brute force through the base, but once you start facing stronger layouts and better defensive design, this exact same mistake becomes extremely costly. Suddenly, attacks that used to work stop working. You feel like you're using the same strategy, but the triples disappear, and in most cases, the problem isn't the army. It's the entry direction, it's the defense activation order, and that is exactly what separates average attacks from consistent triples. Now let's look at the correct way to approach this attack. Notice that the opening is exactly the same. The funnel is still created with the royal champion entry. That part of the attack doesn't change. What changes is the direction of the main push. Instead of sending everything straight toward the town hall, the dragons enter from the side. Now the defenses are no longer activating all at once. They activate in a line, and that changes everything. Instead of stacking damage from multiple directions, the army is now removing one defense at a time, and this should look familiar. It's the exact same principle we saw earlier in the theoretical example. In that exaggerated base, when the army entered from the side, each defensive layer activated gradually, and that's exactly what's happening here. The dragons move forward, a defense activates, it gets destroyed, then the next one engages. No stacked damage. The fight becomes controlled. Now there's another detail here that many players misunderstand. The troops placed on the side are not just there to create a funnel, they also serve another very important purpose. They keep the side defenses occupied. Look at the queen on the left side. She isn't just clearing buildings. She enters at the same time as the dragons, and that timing is critical. Her job is not just to funnel, her job is to hold that defensive line. This is a very common mistake. Many players drop the queen early and then simply wait for her to die. Yeah, she creates the funnel, but she doesn't keep the defenses occupied, and that means those defenses are free to target the main army. Here we do the opposite. The queen fights the defenses on the left. The dragons push through the center. So instead of one army triggering the entire base, you now have two separate fights happening. The queen controls the left side, the dragons control the core. Each line activates defenses little by little, and because the damage is separated, the army never gets overwhelmed. This approach is extremely powerful against stronger layouts. Sometimes a perfect funnel is simply impossible, but instead of forcing everything through one entry, you split the pressure into two controlled lines. Each group of troops takes responsibility for its own defensive path, and once again, this follows the exact same concept we demonstrated earlier. Entering from the side forces the base to activate gradually. Defense activation is controlled, damage is spread out, and the army keeps its momentum. That's the difference between forcing an attack and controlling the base. And once the base is forced to activate this way, everything becomes easier. The defenses activate one by one. Each layer falls before the next one even becomes dangerous. The army keeps moving forward. Momentum builds and the base starts collapsing. Now watch the final seconds. Look at the army. Dragons everywhere. Heroes still alive. Spells barely used. At this point, the triple is inevitable. The base goes down with an absurd amount of troops remaining. And this is the real power of controlling defense pathing. The army didn't change. The troops didn't change. The spells didn't change. The only thing that changed was how the base activated. And once you start seeing attacks through that lens, you stop relying on raw power and start controlling the structure of the fight. That's the difference between forcing an attack and controlling the base. And that is how triples become effortless. Most players focus on armies, better troops, better spells, better strategies, but high-level attacks don't start with the army. They start with how the base reacts. Because the moment you control that reaction, the entire attack becomes easier. You stop relying on raw power and start controlling the fight itself. And that is the real difference between players who occasionally triple and players who triple consistently. And if this video helped you see attacks differently, make sure to subscribe, because on this channel we break down the mechanics behind high-level attacks so you can understand not just what works, but why it works. And